Well, I can't thank you enough. I know I said this, we've talked a little bit, but like I've mentioned to a couple of my friends, and actually earlier today, I took a friend to lunch. It was her birthday, so I bought her lunch, and I was telling her what I was going to be doing later today, and I was saying, you know, if I was given the opportunity to talk to any penciler is one thing, but any inker, if I was given the opportunity to choose from the universe, someone to talk to. I'm not exaggerating when I say it would be you, because I've been such a fan of your work. So I cannot thank you enough for agreeing to talk to little old me. It means the world. So thank you very, very much.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, it's. I've talked to several kind of indie creators. I've had a couple of conversations, and I had one of my friends on. We just kind of do these. But as far as getting to talk to someone who's done big professional work, like you're the first, and to me it's like I was kind of like was I kind of leery about throwing out the question to you like I did on the comment section. I'm like, hey, any chance you'd want to talk? And you're like, sure, let me know. No way,
Yeah.
no way. This is mind blowing. So, thank you. I can't thank you enough. It's I've been a big fan of your work forever, and I'm not joking when I say I would have picked you over any inker. And there's a lot of amazing guys, but you're the one I'd be like, can I start with you? So, um,
Well, I really appreciate that. So
yeah,
thank you very much.
yeah. So I guess kind of what stuff I would like to know, and then I think a lot of people that watch my channel would be interested in is like, I'm always interested, kind of the backstory of how you come to comics and then comic art. Like, when did you discover comics, and what were some of the things that grabbed your attention, and then what made you like, was there a point when you decided like, I think I want to work in that field? Like, how did that ever come to you?
I've said it before. I'm sure I will say it again. It came down to one comic book specifically. To preface before I get into that, to preface it, my grandmother had bought me some comics pretty early on, and so it would have been like the late '70s. Um, a handful of Green Lantern, Green Arrow books by Neil Adams, some Shogun Warrior comic books by Herb Trimp, a fantastic one issue of Fantastic Four. I can't remember. I'm so sorry. I can't remember who drew that issue. I just remember it being gritty. I just remember like Reed having like the 5 o'clock stubble, like the whole issue long. Like they're on the lam. They're in Latveria. I think Doctor Doom has the Invisible Woman, and the other three are kind of on the lam, and they've joined up with the Latvian Resistance Underground.
Right.
So it was kind of like a gritty issue for a little kid to read, but it was fascinating to me. And of course, Godzilla comics. Most of those would have also been hers. And so that got me interested in comics from a pretty young age. And I would follow some here and there, the local 7-Eleven spinner rack. Maybe I'd see a book I'd look at or pick up. Obviously, the toys at the time, like once we got into the 80s, Transformers and G.I. Joe specifically were comic books that, I was all about, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I remember that first G.I. Joe yearbook by Golden and just being fascinated by it. Like there was something about the art in that book that it sung to me. Whereas like the regular G.I. Joe monthlies weren't quite hitting the same way,
Yeah.
And then of course the older I got, and once you realize, oh, it's Michael Golden, right? That's why.
Yeah.
But as far as the book that made me want to get into comic books, New Mutants Special Edition #1. Arthur at 64 pages. Arthur Adams, Terry Austin, Tom Orzechowski. I like to credit the letterers as well, because back then, especially when it was all still hand done,
Right.
I mean that is just a lost art form.
Yes.
100%. Digital lettering, as good as it's gotten, it just doesn't have the same juice that those beautiful hand drawn sound effects and word balloons had. And Tom always brought, that obscene amount of Chris Claremont script to life without ruining the artwork. He knew how to place it around, and just an absolute legend. So yeah, but Arthur and Terry, that was it. So I remember, like, my family, we were driving, it was summer, and we were driving around some of the southern states, checking out monuments, Grand Canyon, that sort of stuff. And before we left, we went to the comic shop, and my mom gave me a budget. It was like $10 or something to just buy some books for the road. And that was one of the books that had just come out. So I grabbed it, and I'm pretty sure that's the only comic that I looked at the entire 2 weeks on the road and back. So, and I remember looking up at it. We had stopped to get gas at one point, and I was in the back seat, and, my mom kind of looked at me and said, "Hey, Joe, are you okay? Because you've been kind of quiet for like a while," which I'm sure was a relief. But I just remember looking up there and saying, when I grow up, I want to draw comic books.
Nice.
And I want to draw them like this guy. So that was it. Never looked back. Like, I knew from then, like, oh, that's what I'm going to do. So.
Did you, like most artists, I think, did you initially think that you were going to be a penciler? Like, when did you was it much later where you're like, inking's your gig, but you wanted to pencil maybe?
Yes, absolutely. I before the comic books, I had been drawing since I could hold a pencil or a crayon, and my parents always did a great job of encouraging me. So I would doodle and draw dinosaurs and the robots and Godzilla and stuff. But it wasn't until after I had been introduced to comics, decided that was the direction that I wanted to go, that I really started pushing, trying to get an understanding for how to create a comic book, how to draw paneled work, and obviously Rich Buckler's How to Draw Comics, How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, by Buscema. All of that, those were just absolutely critical in learning how to get into the field and how to do it properly. So I was always drawing, and by the time I had gotten, into middle school, I had started essentially trying to ink my own, pencils with whatever pens that I had lying around, Pentels, like felt pens, different sizes, etc. By no means permanent ink, but I was trying to emulate the ink line that I saw on the pages of the comics. And by the time I was in high school, I think I was a sophomore, I started doing local comic conventions. I grew up in Huntington Beach, California, and I was very fortunate, at the end of the 80s there, going into the early 90s, that there was a number of local I think they were like quarterly conventions. One was at the Buena Park Hotel, which was right next to Knott's Berry Farm. One was the Red Lion Inn, that was in Ontario, so that was a bit inland from me. But these were all places that, my mom could take me to, like 30-minute drives, drop me off, and then pick me up, when I was done. And there was a couple others around there, around that time. And I would, just contact the promoters and ask for a table. And most of these guys were willing to just, have local artists set up shop for free at a table. It wasn't like a booth per se.
Yeah.
But that was a huge boost in morale for, getting the work I was doing out there and getting feedback from people. And of course, meeting professionals, along the way. I met Rob Liefeld at the Buena Park Hotel when I was in high school, and he had, I think, New Mutants Annual had come out. By, I think it was Tim Zahn. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. CZON, if I remember, and he was just about to start on New Mutants, or he had just, or like it had just come out.
Right.
So I remember like chit chatting with him about it, and we were specifically talking about inking because I remember his Hawk and Dove stuff that Ketzel inked, and I had told him like, hey, I really liked what Tim did on that annual, and I remember him being like, really? So I'm sure there was a difference from what the pencils look like to what Tim did. I get the feeling that Tim probably got a little bit, I don't want to use the term heavy-handed per se, but maybe he changed some stuff, maybe by editorial, decision. I don't know, but definitely what I got, the vibe I got from Rob was like, yeah, I didn't like that. So, like I think he was enjoying inking himself, or maybe he'd been spoiled because he'd gotten Todd to ink a cover at that point.
Yeah.
So it was very interesting. But to finish answering the question, what happened was at one of those conventions there was another local artist who was set up at a booth, and I would see this guy at all these shows. I don't remember his name. I don't know if he ever actually started working professionally or not, but he certainly was aspiring to. And I remember one time he's looking at my stuff, and he had said something, you should really think about inking because your inks are so much better than your pencils, which when you're 15 is like, that's a real blow to the ego. But
right,
something stuck where I was like, okay, well, all right, maybe he's on to something. Maybe that's something I should focus on, because if nothing else, it's probably a lot easier to break in as an inker than as a penciler, especially when you're looking at what the penciling competition is like at the time. I certainly knew I couldn't compete with, say a Jim Lee or, a Mike Mignola or a Kevin Nolan, right? Like these guys were just, light years ahead of what I was capable of then. So I really just started thinking more and more about inking and doing the research about what sort of tools that they use so that I could up my game from my, felt pens and learn how to do it right. So, next thing you know, I'm doing ink samples, with a bunch of wonderful Xeroxes that I had gotten, and wound up taking those to San Diego Comic-Con and shopping them around. So,
and your professional, like first place to hire you?
Would have been Harris Comics. So I believe, no, let me back up. At the end of high school, I graduate 17 that summer. I start really pushing to try to find. I'm still doing those quarterly shows, and I'm trying to expand as much as possible. I remember I got up to Oakland WonderCon one of those summers, to push my samples around. I had been going to San Diego Comic-Con since 1989, and I mean the first couple years of doing that show was just strictly as a fan, running around, meeting the people, but just asking questions, talking. Like I spent all my time in Artist Alley, talking to the various artists. I spent a lot of time talking to Chris Warner. He was pretty hot from the Predator comic by Dark Horse, that had just come out, and he, obviously I had been familiar with his work also, Black Cross before that, and etc. And I just talked him up, to learn, just to sponge as much information as I could.
Yeah.
Jim and Scott and Wills were there. They were sitting all next to each other, right across from. Next to Chris Warner was Carl Story and Brian Selfreeze, and then right across from them is Jim, Scott, and Wills, right? Because at that point, the triple team that they did of the Captain America, Black Widow, Wolvie issue had come out. So now Jim is like officially the artist.
Yeah.
And they just had like a pile. They just had like a stack. Scott, like in front of Scott, he just had a stack of pages. Punisher War Journal, X-Men, Punisher over Wills, just a grip of them. And he just, obviously I was asking him a lot of questions about what tools he was using. And I think he kind of picked up on like, oh, this kid is, he's more interested than the average fan.
Right.
So he like kind of presented me the stack and like, yeah, hey, check him out. So, I mean, I must have spent 30, 40 minutes just standing in front of them and, just going page for page and getting in close and studying them and trying to figure out like, oh, how did he create these lines? He's the one who introduced me to the Hunt 102 Crow Quill.
Okay.
Straight up, that was like, he was like, yeah, my tool of choice is this. He had recommended the Winsor and Newton Series 7, size 2 for brush. Very much the industry standard when I started.
Yeah.
So, so that was, what type of inks to use, etc. So that was fantastic. And springboarding off of that, those sort of experiences, I was able to, get to these other more local shows for me in Anaheim and Pasadena, etc. And I wound up meeting a guy who was starting his own studio, and trying to get basically putting art teams, like creative teams together, and then selling the books to whatever publishers were willing to take them. So technically, that's where I got my very first published comic job, and that came out in 1993. It was the second issue of a book called The Black Pearl, not to be confused with Mark Hamill's Black Pearl from many years later.
Right.
This was a black and white book produced by Eros Comics. So it was a XXX book, to say the least. And issue 1 had already come out and had been inked by the penciler. But issue 2 was running behind deadline, and the guy who ran the studio asked me, like, would you be willing to ink it? And I didn't want my first published work to be XXX, right? But the longer I was hanging around these guys, the more I realized like this might be the only book that they get published, right? So I wound up acquiescing and saying, yeah, sure, I'll go ahead and ink it. And I'm glad I did, because as far as I know, it's only those 2 issues of Black Pearl that ever came out. So I didn't use a pseudonym. I just slapped my name on there because I figured, well, if nothing else, I can go to San Diego this year, and when I'm shopping around my samples, I can say yes to the editors, I do have published work, because that's the number one requirement. The only way to get published work is to have published work. So, so I think it was, I believe it was the San Diego summer of '93 that I wound up getting my first like official, like legit gig. Is I left that show talking to a lot of people, thinking I had a gig at DC. Actually, after waiting in their portfolio review line, they basically told me, "Yeah, we'll give you a job. We'll contact you in a couple weeks." So I was kind of riding high. I think that was Saturday of the show. And then, so the rest of the con, I was like, well, now I can kind of breathe easy and take a break. I can actually enjoy the convention,
Right.
And on the last day on Sunday, I'm just walking by the Harris Comics booth, and I see the model. I guess, had just gotten back from like a lunch break and was sitting down at the booth, and I found like, oh, that's interesting. I haven't seen that before, because really up to that point, I don't think any companies were using what we have come to affectionately refer to as booth babes, right? I think Harris was the first one that was like, hey, this gets a lot of attention. We should do this. And it worked. It legitimately worked for me. And one of the guys behind the booth just looked up to me and said, hey, are you an artist? Because he saw my portfolio in one hand and my other, a bunch of manila packets, Xeroxes of my samples. And I just looked at him and said, yeah, I'm an inker, and he said, well, do you have any samples? I was like, well, yeah, I have one packet left. So I just handed it over to him, and, he said, okay, cool, thanks. And, took one last look at Vampy and went about my day, enjoyed the rest of the Sunday show, and Never heard from DC, but about a week and a half later, I get a phone call from Melanie Crawford Chadwick, editor-in-chief of Harris Comics, and she just, she wanted to throw some samples my way to see what they would look like, and told me that she wanted to put me on Vengeance of Vampirella. So, did my samples, lickety-split, turned them around, sent them in, and got the gig. So,
Nice.
I think I inked Vengeance of Vampirella number 4 was the first thing that I inked for Harris, and then they wound up putting me on Buzz for issue 2 because I guess the deadline was creeping. I think he inked himself on issue 1, and they just wanted to get it, the book out. So they put me on him. So that was the first one that came out. Then issue 3, they had me ink that over Cesar Antimete, and I'd already inked 4 over Steve Crispo. And at that point, I just kind of became the inker on the book. I think issues 5 and 6 were over Kirk Van Wormer. And which, interesting enough, one of your videos was the Devil's Reign you were reviewing. Yeah. And I think it was Silver Surfer.
The first one.
Maybe, yeah, I think it might have been the Silver Surfer Weapon Zero.
Yeah.
I think is the crossover. And I remember you mentioning Kirk in it, like you saw his name and you weren't familiar with his work, and it was like, that's my boy, we wound up working together a lot at Harris, and I kind of drug him along over to Top Cow once I got the job there to do some books, and so I wound up inking him on that Devil's Reign stuff. But I think it was 5 and 6 I did with Kirk, and then and then after that we wound up doing the Rook together, Chains of Chaos and the Rook. Inked some John Stinsman on Chains of Chaos before he was at Extreme, and I think that actually helped me get some of my early freelance work with Rob as well. So that's where it began.
Yeah, wow. It's kind of like a lot of it's just kind of right place at right time. It's,
Yes.
Talking about that, being right place, right time, location, ends up being a big part of it. So you talked about them, somebody putting a Hunt 102 in your hand. That's a hard tool to learn. Was that a difficult tool for you? Because I refer to you guys that still use that tool. Like, you guys are Jedi Knights. These are lightsabers, and you guys are like masters. If you can figure out how to use this, because it's so tricky. So
I would say that before the Hunt 102, I had already worked with some nibs because I knew that comic book inkers were, using brushes and nibs and India ink. So before I met Scott, I'd already gotten my hands on some Gelots and, some other brands and had messed around with them. Some of those had some really nice bounce to them and were a bit softer to the touch, whereas the Hunt and later Deleter nibs are much tighter, so they don't have as much of it. You really have to bear into them if you want to get a thicker line.
Yeah.
And so kind of like learning how to hold it properly and how to apply the strokes so that I wasn't tearing the paper or, catching the paper and creating a splatter. That happened a lot early on.
Got some spit ink all over the place.
Oh yeah. So it took once I got the Hunt 102s and started playing with them, it took a little bit to get used to it. I had the samples that I had done for that Comic-Con I went to. My buddy was working at Marvel, and he was in the art return department when he first got the job. And he had sent me the Xerox, full-size 11x17 Xeroxes of the entire issue of Punisher Warzone #1. So, JR Jr. He had sent me 11x17 Xeroxes of the entire first issue of Arthur Adams' Fantastic Four. He had done 3 issues of FF, where it was like the new team. So it was Hulk, Ghost Rider, Spider-Man, and Wolverine.
Yeah.
Right. And and obviously me being a big Arthur fan, I was on cloud nine with those pages. And he had also sent me 11 by 17 Xeroxes of the entire first issue of Jeff Johnson's Wonder Man. So I felt it was great because it was three very distinct styles of pencils to choose from. So I just took 3 pages of each that were that I felt would highlight what I'm capable of. Some very dense pages with a lot of little panels, a lot of little figures. Some of the J.R. Jr. stuff. I picked one of the really big, beefy images where it's big shot of just would draw so big on the page. Yeah. It was so dynamic. And there's a lot of really dense black. So I was okay, I can do a lot of brush work on this.
Right.
Right. One of the Arthur Adams I picked the page 1 of the Arthur Adams book because page 1 is the scrolls coming out of hyperspace in their ship.
Yeah.
And so there's all these speed lines, that I'm okay, that's going to be a really good example of showing, precise tech work, what I'm capable of there, etc. It really detailed interior shot of the bridge of the ship, with all the scrolls, very much like an Enterprise bridge shot.
Yeah.
And then the Jeff Johnson stuff, has this great open energy. So, I would pick some fun dynamic shots, of Wonder Man and then also a talking head page, right? So it was just I can do all these different things. And also I'm comparing myself too. It's on Jeff Johnson stuff, Terry Austin was inking him. So I know how Terry handled it. Mm-hmm. So what can I do? Bring a different flavor to it, but also, lean into what I feel Jeff wants from the pencils. With Art Adams, I knew that Art Taber had inked that stuff. And so I wanted to try my best to emulate what Artie had done there, just to be as faithful to it. And also Arthur's pencils are very, very tight. And then with the J.R. Jr. stuff, that was inked by Klaus. So it's okay, I got to get beefy with this stuff. I just got to get, just guttural lines, juice, throw it down, do it fast, make it bold. So they were all very unique. And I think, honestly, I credit that to helping me, get that job. Because I think, showing that variety, the different styles, mm-hmm. and approaches is exactly what an editor wants to see. If I'm hiring this guy, can he handle whatever I throw at him?
Yeah. Do you find I've heard some inkers as I've watched interviews and things like that, and talking with. I told you that I got to be real good friends with Chuck Gibson, and mm-hmm. I've heard them talk about finding tools that are as good a quality today as they used to be back in the day. Have you found that to be true with what you've is it hard to find if you go and find just a generic nib, is there a brand you go for that's a better one that you say is this is it's not cheap quality, there's a better one, or do you find finding quality tools is difficult?
Yeah, and in fact, I'll take this opportunity to do a quick flip on the camera here. One of the things that, being an inker, that's always going to be important is, your inks. So I always keep a variety of them around because different ink affects the paper you work on differently. Now, personally, I'm a big fan of water-based inks. So back in the day, Kona Universal would have always been my go-to. I would just buy the big-ass bottles of them. And, I would go through one of those bottles in a week and a half, These days, I kind of keep it a little bit simpler. If I'm ever working on some, Eon board, okay, then you pretty much have to use the Eon Vortex ink that they also sell. Any water-based inks, will just bleed on Eon board.
Oh,
So
wow.
I always keep a bottle of that around. It's a bit of a denser ink, so it doesn't flow off the quill as quite as nice as I prefer, but look, it still works. Good old Super Black. I remember that was recommended to me probably in the early aughts. I remember talking to Victor Olazaba one day at the con at San Diego Comic Con, and I was looking at his originals, and it was like the blacks on them were just like so dense. They were literally super black, and he told me what he was using. That's what it was. So I picked some up. I always keep a bottle of that around. Good old Dr. P.H. Martin Black Star. That probably would have been some of the earliest ink that I used. Before the Hunt 102s, back when I was in high school. That was the pickup. I think there was also, what was the other brand? It was like WF or something like that. Those would have been some of the first inks I ever used. These days, like I said, I really like the water-based inks, and I'm having a more difficult time in recent years finding Konor brand. So this Rapidograph brand works equally great, and this is also really easy to refill any tech pens with. So, and we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
And on that note, like, there's also the same brand makes opaque white ink. And so when it comes to any sort of corrections that I need to do on a page, this is primarily what I'm using, because I can put it on, I can slap it on a quill, and it goes down dense, and I can create line weights with it if I need to. So,
Nice.
so as far as inks go, those are the primary ones that I'm using. We talked already and showed off the quills a little bit. So these are examples of the Hunt 102 Crow quill. Since I have to hold my phone, I can't really, like, I can try to show you. Like, you apply pressure, you can see there's a slit down the middle to the barrel, and that's how you create line weights, thick to thins, by just putting the pressure on the paper with it. And I've kind of gotten spoiled. This is a Grifold 47 quill holder. They don't make these anymore. This one is a knockoff, but it was the first one I got. You can kind of tell it's a bit dirtier, it's a bit faded, it's gotten a lot of years of work. And as soon as I got one of these holders, it never went back. So Grifold is the same brand that would have been making like X-Acto blade holders. All right, it's the same sort of concept where you can unscrew it to loosen this top, open it up, you can pull your quill out, put a new one in, etc.
Right.
Tighten it up, But these are really lightweight. They have a really nice feel since they're metal, as opposed to like the thin plastic brown nib holders that you probably most frequently see.
It's what I've got these things.
Right, exactly, and that's what I started with, right? But this also has a bit of a grip here, which I like. So, anyways, like I said, I've been using the old Grifold holders, and what it is, anytime on eBay, I have a search on eBay saved that whenever a Grifold 47 comes up, it tells me, and I usually just snake them right away as soon as they come up. There's one that's up right now. It just came up 2 days ago. But they want like $65 for it, so I'm like, I'm gonna pass on that one. So, but usually I can grab them for like $20-25. Couple toothbrushes. I've got a denser bristle toothbrush, which is good for like harsh splatter effects. You can do it with either black ink or white ink, and you just kind of move it around your page, and just give it the old flick.
Yeah.
And this will come down because it's a thicker bristle. It will come down a bit harder, bigger blots, really good for like blood splatter and stuff. Whereas this one, you can tell this is one that's seen some love. This is a much softer bristle. So this is great for creating like gradations, like if you want to try to achieve like an airbrush style effect
Yeah.
without, breaking out the airbrush, because creating an airbrush is not fun at all. And this will go down, considerably faster and easier to clean up. And so I've actually used this a lot. I have a page here which I'm going to show you where I use this exact brush on to create some gradations with.
Nice.
And as far as brushes go, so let's see, what do we got here? So this is the only Winsor Newton Series 7 that I still own. This is actually a size 1 brush. I think I mentioned earlier that size 2 was kind of the industry standard for decades. And to really answer your question, this is probably the one product that not only has been the most difficult to get my hands on over the years, but also I feel has really lost its quality. Where when I first started, like these were, the staple. These were the best. I could just get the most fantastic lines with them. But I would say maybe like the last 3 or 4 that I bought, like within the last decade, it's not the same. Something's happened to, I don't know if it's the Kolinsky Sable that they're using. Someone had told me recently that they were bought out, so it's a different company, and I don't know how long ago that was. But I can say without any doubt that, the Series 7 is not she ain't what she used to be. But thankfully, again, good old Mr. Scott Williams recommended to me, I think it was in the mid-aughts, San Diego Comic-Con again, going over and talking to him. He recommended the Raphael to me, 8404s primarily. So this is a Raphael 8404 size 2, and this would have been around the time that he was inking David Finch on the Batman book.
Yeah.
And he was doing this really great like chiseled brush strokes for his rendering, and I was inquiring like, how are you achieving that? Because it wasn't quill, and that's when he told me about the Raphael. So this size 2, this 8404 specifically has what I would consider a chisel tip, which gives you that kind of like blocky stroke, like it's almost like at an angle when you first lay it down.
Yeah.
As opposed to the 8408, which is more of like a tapered tip. So something like this, I think, is great for hair. Like if you've got like long black hair on a figure, this gives me really great lines for that. This is also a size 1, so this is I can get really, really fine with this one. But size 1 and size 2s are usually what I stick with for brushes. I love the Raphaels. Big fan. And then look, you got to spot blacks. You're inking Magnolia, and you've got a page of all black. Well, you better have a fat brush that can handle it. So I always keep like a nice, and it doesn't have to be special brush. This is, I think, is just synthetic. Just went down to Dick Blick, grabbed it, but I always keep a nice, thick, flat brush specifically for spotting big areas.
Right.
So can't go wrong there. And speaking of brush, well, if you're going to use brush, you better have your brush cleaner, because the number one thing that you're going to find with the degradation of a tool that's organic hair is you're not cleaning it, and the ink's getting into the base of the metal, and that you're going to start losing hairs, and it's just going to be a problem. So after every time that you've used it, make sure you clean your brush as well as you possibly can. So, and I think this is Winsor and Newton. Let me see here. I can't tell. So, but it's brush cleaner. I don't know. They come in beige or brown little circle containing plastic hairs like this. They're great.
Like or some kind of just a paste or a cleaner. Like I've heard of it, but I've never used it.
Here, let me see if I can. Put the phone down for a second. I'm sorry.
You're good.
There you go. I had to pop it open, so you can see it's just like a wedge of what looks like soap essentially in there. You just
Okay.
dampen your brush and then just gently swirl it around. You don't want to mash your brush into it.
Sure.
You want to try to maintain the tip of the brush as much as possible. So be delicate with it, work it around, and just get it clean. You can see how much ink it takes off. Like this stuff is great. So
Okay.
yeah. For anyone who's interested, there's your box of Hunt 102s from Speedball. You see the little blue box? That's where they come. You get a dozen of them in here.
Yeah.
So I've been hitting up Amazon for those mostly. It's just a better price than going to the art stores these days. One of the things I do like is I like having some tech pens that use actual India ink. So when I first started, the Kohinoor tech pens were kind of what everyone was using. If you were in animation, specifically working on cells or vellum, then you were pretty much using Kohinoor. And these tech pens are Rotring, so they are also a German brand. I first was introduced to them. My assistant Marco Galli was a big fan. Like we all had our sets of the Kohinoor tech pens, but he was like, "Hey, you got to check out these Rotrings." So the first one I got was you can't really see, it's kind of worn now, but this is the Rotring Rapidographs, and they are very similar to the Kohinoors, but they have a different feed in the tube than the Kohinoor does. And they have some really, really, really fine tips that I'm a big fan of. The problem is they do tend to clog if you don't keep them clean.
Right.
So, you have to be very cognizant of that. And, I would say after any deadline, it's a really good idea to take apart your tech pen and give it a good thorough cleaning. And you'll get a lifetime's worth of use out of it.
Nice. Yeah.
And then recently, because Rotring no longer makes the Rapidograph pens, they have now introduced their Isograph brand. And these Isographs are literally Rotring's version of the Kohinoors. So the feed mechanism for the ink and the well that holds the ink, exactly the same as how Kohinoor does it, which makes it incredibly easy to clean. And again, you're also getting pure India ink. It's great for tech work. Get yourself a beveled ruler or a beveled triangle, and you can use these pens on it without worrying about bleeding onto the page. So, and we're kind of getting to the end here. The Copic Multiliner, the SP, I know this is pretty much exclusively what Mark Silvestri inks with these days.
I was going to say,
This is,
the current Sylvester tool, right?
I'm sorry?
I was going to say that's the current tool that he uses to ink himself, right? That was what my understanding was.
Yep, exactly. And I'm pretty sure it's the same one, the .03 and the .05 are the two finest tips they have. And having something like this so these are essentially felt pens, but the ink that's in the wells is, I don't think it's a pure India ink, but it is really a dense black. So they're great. They're supposed to be archival, is my understanding. I guess we'll see in about 15 years what the results are.
Yeah, right.
But that's what they're claiming. But you get really, really, really fine lines with this. So if I'm on the con circuit, I've got a grip of pens from different brands similar to this. But these ones I find like, hey, I need to do a quick touch up. Tiny little, I missed a little tiny something, just grab this really quick, knock it out, no problem, it's good to go. This is actually a more recent purchase. So this is one of the Posca white pen markers. I wound up watching a video from a while ago that David Finch had done. I want to say it's like for something called Proco. It was recommended to me on YouTube, and I noticed that Ryan Benjamin had done a lot of videos for them on how to create artwork, and then Finch had done a bunch for them as well. And so one of those, he was doing a page pretty much from scratch. Like, he had a couple thumbnails laid down, but he was really showing his process of, like, here's a panel that I fully penciled it before I inked it, and then some of the other panels were like, this is just a layout or a thumbnail, and then I finish it in ink. And one of the things that he talked about was how he liked this Posca marker because he could lay it down, it comes out thick, and then he can just like go back over and ink something if he needs to fix it, or create like a negative effect or whatever. So I figured, okay, well, I'll give it a try. And as opposed to like the old school like fat, thick whiteout pens that you just pick up at Staples, right?
Yeah.
Or the Pentel ones. I found that this is really nice. It goes down soft. It's definitely opaque, and you can, after it's dry, you can ink right over it and not have any problems. So this was a pleasant surprise for a newer tool. And then last but not least, talking about when I'm on the con circuit, I'm doing commissions on the con floor. I don't want to have an open bottle of ink. And I used to do that. I used to go to the conventions and had my little toolkit with me, and would ink right there at the booth. Dip pen, brushes, the whole nine. All I can say about that is I learned my lesson. So I stopped doing that, and made a shift to trying out different brands of pens. So Pitt pens, Pentels, Pigmas, Prismacolors, the Copics. These are all pens that I've tried out and used over the years. And anytime I go to a new art store or a supply store, I always check out their pen section, okay? Sure. And I was at like an art restorer's location in Colorado a couple of years ago. And so I'm looking at like the assortment of pens they have, and they had this little set. And it's just different sizes, thin to thick pens. And I was like, okay, I'll pick it up and try it out. And I really like this set. The ink is really dense and black. I don't know what sort of ink they're actually using in them. Like, I don't know if it's pure India ink, but boy, does it come out as dense as real India ink does. So I could literally use these on like a comic book page that I'm inking with my traditional tools, and you wouldn't know the difference in the ink quality. So
is the brand pen? Is that what that says?
I think it's Uni. I think Uni's the brand, is the company.
Myself.
Yeah, and then this is. Let me see if I can get a better. So there you go. Yeah. Fine. Liner drawing pens. I don't know if it's pin or if it's PN. But regardless, it was a good little pickup, and I was like, hey, these are great. So, and I've gotten a lot of use out of them over the last couple of years. So they're still going strong. So that's also impressive, because usually, like one of these felt pens, I mean, those things are dust after a convention. Right. So this has been one of those happy accidents that you just find something that's pretty cool. I'm sure you can probably find them online, Amazon or whatever, but this was just one of those random store pickups. So anyways.
Awesome. That's great. I love that stuff. I love the technical end of it, seeing all these different tools and things like that. That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah. Well, I was happy to put this little group of tools together in anticipation for this, and that way we can, not only show you what I'm using, but anyone, any of the viewers, that might be interested in inking comic books or inking their own work, whatever it may be, can get an idea of what some of the traditional tools are. I mean, look, we're living in this digital age now, and I remember an interview that I did in the aughts at my artist alley table, and they were asking me about digital tools. Like, what did I think about digital inking? And I remember saying, pretty bluntly that, you know, as it stands, there's no program or tool set that I've seen yet that can match what I can do by hand with my quills and my brushes.
Yep.
At that point, I'd seen some of Jonathan Glapian's digital inking, and he was pretty much the only guy whose work I saw that I was like, okay, he gets it. Like, he's doing it right. Like, he's actually getting that nice bounce in, the line work that you would see with traditional tools. But I mean, in 2026, good Lord, I just saw, some ads on Facebook for some new digital brushes that look, I mean, I couldn't believe it. Like, they had like a little video just showing like the guy with his Wacom throwing these brush strokes, and you literally can see the density of the pressure of the ink line in the stroke. So if you do it fast, it looks like, a light watercolor stroke, but if you bear into it, like, you can see like where the ink pools in it, so it's much denser and darker. I was like, okay, they got there. So
yeah, I watch a lot of inkers, and I was going to ask you what your thoughts were on digital, because I understand. I talk often. Digital art, I get why people do it. The infinite kind of options, options to attack your art with. But there's something about just having an original. There's no such thing as an original with digital artwork, and that's a big deal, especially in the aftermarket for guys that want to sell their stuff. But there's some guys who can do digital, and if you kind of can't tell unless you're, I don't know, you got a really trained eye. I've talked about, like I was saying, like I work with Chuck Gibson, and he's told me, because he used to do everything by hand, and he's moved into digital, and he said that it was very important to him to develop his digital ink line to look as authentically by hand as he could possibly get it. And I feel like he's got there. Like, he's been doing it for a minute. And I'm going to show you, this is a couple of years ago, he just kind of joined me on my live streams, and I mentioned that my birthday was coming up, and he's like, hey, you want me to ink something for you for your birthday? I'm like, really? Seriously? And so he did this for me. He inked this.
oh, nice.
It's all digital ink, but he gets some lines out of it that I'm just so happy
Yeah.
with.
Oh, yeah. I mean, again, like, yeah, the tools have come so far that you're able to create those weights to make it look just like a brush stroke or a quill stroke. So,
Yeah.
I mean, and again, I got to imagine it's a lot faster too. You don't have to wait for the ink to dry to move around the page with. So,
And I think he told me that he started doing digital because he thought it might help him get quicker. And I'm pretty sure he said it doesn't make him any quicker. It just gives him more options. He's like, it still takes kind of the same amount of time. I think he was expecting it to make him quicker. And he's like, not really, because you're still working to get that exact look. But he does really, really good stuff. But he does a lot of, he's doing his own live streams on his own channel now, where he's just back to inking by hand and getting back into just doing it by, with just tools on, doing inks over blue line. And I've heard a lot of artists talking about they've been doing digital work for a long time, but they're kind of like, I got that itch to put real ink on paper again, and they're back to it, and just, they're like, there's something just so much more, I'm connected to it,
Yeah, in the mortal words of that, I like the feel of the paper under my hand.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I've always kind of lived by that creed as well. I think because I'm old man brained now, I have a difficult time wrapping my head around working digitally. If I was really going to commit to it, I would have to get a Wacom monitor.
Right.
And those bad boys ain't cheap. So, so I haven't gone in on one yet, but maybe one of these days. So, but
So I was just gonna say, have you seen that thing that McFarlane inks on, that giant screen?
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, and that's the thing I was talking about. Like these Wacom monitors, they move. They're like on an axis that you pivot them and move them. You can turn them around, lean them
Yeah.
back and forth, so that you can approach, the page from any angle, just like you would with an original. So, just like if you were moving it around on your drafting table, etc. And that's what I'm saying. Like I'd have to get one of those if I really wanted to, to learn how to do it. So.
Yeah.
But to your point, I like having the original artwork as well, because you said the aftermarket is a huge part of how a freelance illustrator
Right.
supplements their income. So and I'm sure you've seen what the original art market prices on some of those '90s
Yeah.
pages or older, like what they go for, and it's like, well, that's a pretty penny, so that really helps out. And look, none of us, it doesn't matter who you are, if you're working in comics, you're basically left to your own devices. You're not getting health care from your publisher. You're not, they're not paying your taxes. You've got to take care of all that on your own. So it behooves you to have something to fall back on. And having, as an inker, the standard would be about a third of the original artwork is returned to you, 2/3 to the penciler, which makes sense to me. I mean, they're doing the heavy lifting straight up. So I've always been very happy to get my 1/3 back, and and have been very fortunate to have worked with some amazing talent,
Yeah.
over the course of my career. So I've had some really nice, pristine pages to sell to the secondhand market, and can't complain. So
Well, well, to your point, talking about some of the artists that you've worked with, um, I'd kind of be curious to kind of like you do a little kind of a run through of some of the your favorites. Like I know, you've worked with David Finch. Um, I was kind of surprised that I didn't know. I must have missed it somehow that you inked Dale Keown somewhere.
yeah, couple
That
times now.
I don't know where that happened, and I missed it. But you'd mentioned it. I'm like, how did I miss that? Um, but yeah, just kind of like some of the big names that you've worked with, and any artists that did you find any of these artists as you kind of talk about which ones you worked with? Were any of them harder to ink, or some of them easier to ink? And is there anybody that you've never got to work with that you would really want to?
Ah, well, I mean, so to answer that last question, there's a couple artists working right now whose pencils. Every time I see them post something, I'm like, oh man, that just looks so fun. I would love to take a crack at that. And it's just a couple of EBs. It's Ed Bennis and Eddie Burrows, right? I see these guys post pencils all the time. Ed's always posting pinups, commissions that he does.
Huh?
Um, Boy, does he draw some sexy women, right?
He's so
And
good. He's so good.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I like the way that he approaches his rendering on the pages. It looks just open enough where an inker can really get in there and interpret it, and maybe play with it, do something a little different. And I've wanted to take a crack at him for sure. And then, yeah, I think it was a couple years ago I first saw Eddie Burrows post something online. I think it was like a Black Adam issue he was doing. I don't know if it was an annual or a mini series. And like the first piece I saw was this full page splash of Black Adam like sitting in like some sort of throne with this intricate like hexagonal shaped background behind him, like crisscrossing shapes. And he had just nailed the shadows on all of it perfectly, right? It's like you don't have to do. There's no interpretation there. It's like, okay, I can literally see where the light source is coming from on this. Every line is perfect. Every drop shadow, every cast shadow, every core shadow, it's all perfect. Cinematic. James Cameron split that and filmed it, right? Um, And I was like, man, that would be fun to do. There was also some really bold rendering in the background, like kind of cross hatching a gradation down from top to bottom. And it was, it's loose enough where, I think in the wrong hands, you kind of lose the shapes that are happening. But when I looked at it, I was like, oh, I know exactly how to handle that. And I kind of wanted to print the piece up and just slap inks on it and send it to him, see what he thought. But I never got around to it, so maybe one day. But yeah, if the opportunity ever comes up to ink either of them, I would be down in a heartbeat.
Right.
As far as some of the guys who were popular when I was coming up, I've been lucky to ink 5 of the 7 Image co-founders. So the only 2 I haven't is Todd and Eric. So when I was younger, it was very important to me. Like, oh man, I would love to, to get all 7 of them at some point, so just to say I did it. But the older I get, the less of a driving force that is, But look, I can't lie; it still would be a pleasure to have an opportunity to ink either of them on, a pin-up or a cover or something. Just to say I did it, and check that off the bucket list.
Right.
So,
Sure.
but most of the artists who I either came up with or whose work I really respected, even as a kid and then as a young man and as a professional, I've been very lucky enough to have actually worked with over the years. So the best penciler, like hands down, that I've ever inked is Mark Silvestri. I mean, there's just no arguing that. Master storyteller, master, of light and shadow. It's always consistent. Panel to panel, page to page, moving the camera around the scene. That light source is the same. Doesn't matter. He's consistent. He knows exactly where to place it, and he doesn't fudge it up. He draws beautiful looking characters. His women are some of the sexiest drawn females in comic books. Always has been.
Yeah.
And, I can go all the way back to X-Men versus Avengers, and just remember shots, of Rogue and of Storm, that are just like, oh man, look at that. They're so sexy. And then at the same token, he certainly doesn't shy away from the eye candy for the ladies either. Like his men, you look at Jackie Estacado from The Darkness, whether it was, the original run or the new run. I mean, that dude is freaking cut like a Greek god. The way that Mark understands human anatomy, when he does choose to exaggerate it, never looks bad. It never looks unreal or too bulky or it never looks wrong. He just knows how to present the human form in a remarkable and pleasing way. So
Right.
yeah, guys, he's a stud. His rendering, his everything about his work is just perfect. So that was a real treat, a real honor, and I can't think of anyone else I've ever inked that can compare to what he's capable of putting on a page.
Yeah, Silvestri is easily probably my favorite artist. It's kind of hard to nail it down to one person, but he's always top 3, and it always comes back to him. And I've said, like I was telling you, his current modern stuff, I don't think it looked any better than when you were doing it. There's something about Silvestri's organic kind of art style that your inking just seems to just work perfectly with. And I think it looks so fantastic. It just works the best, in my opinion.
Well, I really appreciate that. I mean, Mark has had some of the best inkers, in his career. Bottom line, you look at some of that, you look at some of the early stuff, he had some Joe Rubenstein on him. He had Dan Green for all those years. By the time he got to, once they formed Image, Scott Williams inking him, on those first couple issues of Cyberforce. And then Bat, once Bat came along and they started working together, I mean, to me, I felt that, well, Mark's never looked better, right? The way that Matt was approaching the pages, the way that he created the line work, because Mark is so good at light and shadow. One of the things with Bat that I noticed specifically was he was always he's one of the best at understanding light. So every line he throws, he's thinking about where that light is coming from. So you're getting the high points, the thin points, the breaks, all where the light would be affecting the figure or the environment the most, and then those heavier lines away, like where the shadows would be. Every single line, even the rendering, So I always really appreciated that, and I learned a lot from Matt when I first got to Top Cow. I really studied his work, so I definitely appreciate that you liked what I did. For me, it was always a matter of trying to achieve the penciler's vision with whoever I was working with. I always felt that was one of my strengths, that I could actually give them what they were looking for in different styles.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but yeah, thank you. That was a lot of fun. So I loved inking Mark. Those were some good times. I mean, Finch is very good. He's a very good. He's a good drawer. So I always enjoyed working with him on Cyberforce and Aphrodite 9 and whatever crossovers we did back in the day. Joe Benitez is the love-hate story of my professional career. He's the guy who they paired me with after Rick Claw was done. They put me on Weapon Zero, and I had taken over for Aaron Soud, and Aaron was doing a fantastic job handling Benitez's very loose pencils, and Aaron was just really cleaning them up, making them really pop and very distinct, and separating the shapes really beautifully. And when I got those first Weapon Zero pages, there was just so much work in them that, I mean, I was killing myself trying to make those deadlines. And Joe B, he's a sloppy Joe. His pencils are sloppy and loose and rough. Now he's really cleaned up over the years, but back then especially, there was a lot of interpretation going on. So by the time I was done with Weapon Zero, I was like, man, I need a break. And I think that's when they put me on Cyberforce with Finch, and that was just such a polar opposite of what I had been doing. I got to really get in there with some bold brush strokes and big, thick rendering, all that perpendicular line work that Dave does. Very fun. And I remember that when Dave was going to go do Ascension, I wanted to be on board with that. I still wanted to ink him on it, but he wanted to ink that, and I don't blame him because, again, that's amazing. And at the time, there wasn't anything else for me to do at the studio other than Joe Benitez on In the Darkness. And I remember telling David Wohl, that the editor, I think he was the EIC at the time, I told him, man, I don't want to ink Joe Benitez on The Darkness, man. That's so much work. And he was like, well, I don't have to tell you. That's what we got. So I wound up deciding, okay, I guess, that's what I'm going to do. So I hopped on Darkness, and that's when I learned to love inking Joe Benitez. And he's probably been the longest, most consistent penciler that I ever paired with, with our run on those two properties and various crossovers and pinups and covers over the years. Magdalena, which came after The Darkness, is still one of my favorite projects I've ever been a part of. So that felt really, really good. And yeah, it really turned me around, right? I went from hating him to absolutely loving him. So, and also, all these years later, working together, he's one of my few true friends that I have, in the professional comic book industry. So really, really fun guy. If you ever wind up running into Joe B at a convention, take some time, hang out with him. Be careful in the bar after hours, though.
Well, he actually, like I said, I have a local, I've only gone to comic conventions that are local here. And I mentioned to you how a couple years ago, uh, Matt Benning was sitting across from me and just a few tables to the left. And so I made a point to go over and talk to him and chat him up. And he was really friendly. And we talked kind of art and inking for a while. And then at a different show, Joe Benitez was across from me. And I wanted to go say hi, but at that moment I kind of felt like I didn't want to go bug him. But I know we're at a public show and that's why he's there. But I didn't want to pester him. But while he was across from me, he ended up doing a live stream on Instagram. And so I
Oh,
tucked
wow.
into I said, "Hey, I'm right across from you." And he looked up and we kind of made eye contact and I waved at him and he waved back. And that was it. But I didn't want to go pester him. But yeah, he's an incredible artist.
He's a great guy too. Bottom line, he's a lot of fun and very down to earth and chill and has a great sense of humor. So and yeah,
Yeah.
and just incredible talent. What an amazing design sense. So
Oh, yeah.
I absolutely love working with Joe. But getting back to the first part of that question, you had mentioned Dale Keown specifically.
Yeah.
So there's two issues I've inked over Dale. And the first one is the important one, and that was, I think it was around 2004. It was Hulk the End, and it was a one-shot soft cover written by, it was pairing Peter David and Dale again. Because
Right.
this is, they had done their iconic run of The Incredible Hulk, back in the late 80s, early 90s, after Dale moved over to Image and did Pit. It was a real triumph for Marvel to get him to come back and do that one shot. And so, it reunited that creative team. And I got the job because I had done a few issues of Fantastic Four over Jeff Johnson, which, again, that kind of came full circle. That felt really nice. Like, a decade earlier doing the Jeff Johnson Wonder Man samples to actually inking him professionally on Fantastic Four. I'd gotten the job from Bobby Chase, who was a fantastic editor, and I loved working for her. She was so communicative. She was so polite. She was able to, she answered hard questions and, never shied away from anything. It was a great experience. And after those three issues, she basically wanted to, pair me with Dale on that Hulk project. And unfortunately, before we started working on the book, Marvel let her go. And then the project drifted over to Tom Brevoort, who had just started editing over there at Marvel, or he had just moved up the ranks to become like a senior editor. And so this would have been one of the first major projects under his direction. And I hadn't heard anything for months, so when I went up reaching out to him to see if I was still attached to the project, he did confirm that, yeah, you're still on board. So I wound up recommending Dan Kemp to color it for us. He was very hot at the time because of Spawn. He was the monthly colorist on that book. So Greg Capullo, Danny Miki, Dan Kemp, and those are some gorgeous books.
Yeah.
And he was local. He lived in, I was in Huntington Beach and he was in Costa Mesa. So, I had been doing a lot of illustration work at the time for Dark Star Skateboards, and I had been going to Dan to color the majority of them. He was doing beautiful work. So, I was very happy to be able to get him on board there. And, that project was, it was a lot of work, and some of the deadline got pretty tight on that one, but those are some pages I'm very, like, especially some of the early pages, very proud of. Like, Dale had just, you could tell, like, okay, this DPS probably took him 2 weeks to draw. So, it gets to me. I mean, I don't have the luxury of taking 2 weeks on it, but it's still going to take a few days to knock that out, just the sheer amount of work on it. And so that was a gnarly project and a lot of fun. And then I wound up inking him a few years ago. I think it was 2019 on an issue of the Avengers. So under Tom Brevoort again. So kind of reuniting, almost 20 years later, reuniting, or 15 years later, reuniting the Hulk the End art team. So that was fun.
I'm gonna have to seek those out. I gotta go find those books. I didn't even know that you had done those. So now it's more for me to go find. I can't wait to find those things.
Well, definitely check out Hulk the End. That's one I'm definitely very, very proud of. And listen, I would love to send you a grip of comps so you can see all this stuff. But unfortunately, all my comic books collection and complimentary copies are all in storage in Montana right now, so I don't have easy access to them, sadly. But hopefully, sometime in the next year or so, I can get to the storage unit, and when I do, I will make a concerted effort to put together a happy little grab bag for you of some older books.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
And obviously, one of the big ones that you've done, you were inker on Fathom.
Oh yeah, Mike Turner. So I mean, rest in peace. He's an amazing talent. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that of all the artists from Top Cow that tutored under Mark, Mike was the standout. I think if you talk to anyone at the studio at the time or now, they'll tell you the same. Like, he just took it to another level, right? If you were comparing what he was doing to some of the other guys, what Billy Tan was doing, what Finch was doing, what Benitez was doing, there was just something about Mike's art that popped. And look, I'll tell you, before I got the job at Top Cow, the Ballistic miniseries had come out, and man, I remember buying those books and seeing there's like a double-page spread of Ballistic on a motorcycle, and it was just so dynamic and larger than life and just so interesting. And then when Witchblade came out, like, I still remember to this day, there's like a double-page spread of Sarah in her little one-piece red miniskirt dress, where she's like doing this, like, she's like jumping over a table, doing like a jump split while shooting a gun like down below, and it's just it's just such a dynamic image that it just was, like I said, it was just popping on a whole nother level. It was just amazing work, and obviously the fans responded to it and him. So by the time that Fathom came around, well, I'm sorry, it was Tomb Raider Witchblade and the sequel Witchblade Tomb Raider. The first times I really got to like work with him like full issues, because I'd done a fair amount of Witchblade issue 20, if I remember, as a fill-in to help out on the deadline, and that led me to getting the crossover book. And I guess he liked what he saw, and so once he started Fathom, he basically offered me the gig and bumped up my page rate in a considerable amount. So like, there's a reason that those pages look the way they do, and it's because, I mean, everyone I worked with, Marco, any assistant that I had that would help out at the time, Marco was like my main guy, doing my tech work primarily, spotting blacks when he could. We put 110% into every single page. We're talking wake up at noon and go get a coffee, grab a bite, 30 minutes later, back at the house, sit down, and then just working, you know, 10 hours, 12 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours straight, every day, 7 days a week. You know, there are no weekends for a freelance artist.
Right.
You have deadlines, so you just got to get them done. And so an 8 hour shift, I laugh at you. Like that would have been nice, but there's no shot that I'm getting these sort of pages done in that sort of time frame.
Yeah.
And the simple and look, the simple fact is, man, he was paying me, so in my mind, it was like, well, I have to step up to what he's offering me. There's no shortcutting this stuff. We got to, and look, he wasn't shortcutting the pencils either. You look at those backgrounds, whether it's an oil rig in the middle of the ocean, like a helicopter shot looking down on it, in all of its glory, every step on every staircase, every handrail, every exhaust pipe. It's photo accurate. You look at his design work for the experimental aircraft that he created for that book. So he's not referencing anything. That's just straight out of his head, and it's just amazing level of detail and design that you just had to take the time with. You can't take a shortcut on that. You just gotta put the work in. So that's what I did, and yeah, I mean, that was one of my proudest projects. Those 9 issues of Fathom, and plus preview and zero issue, etc. All the covers.
Yeah.
So,
I was a big fan of Michael Turner from the beginning of Witchblade, and I thought that B-Tron inking looked amazing. Like, I thought this was
oh yeah,
fantastic. Only Fathom comes out, and I'm like, this is different. It's still Turner, but there's just this finer, kind of tighter look. It's just everything like you just described. Like, you can see the work in these pages. That's why I was so excited when I found this black and white reproduction of issue 1, where it's not quite an artist edition, but it's about as close as we'll be able to get. But you can see
yeah,
the pencil he put in and the ink work that you were putting in.
yeah. The Fathom #1 black and white book and the Magdalena #1 black and white book that they produced are two of my pride and joys. Those are some of my favorite. Those are the two. Yeah, those are my two favorite comic books that I've worked on that have been ever printed, because it lets the buyer see the uncolored black and white raw artwork.
Yeah,
I mean, it's still reduced to comic size, like you said. It's not an artist like a museum edition or anything, but it's just the bare bones. This is the black and white. So very proud of both of those. I mean, they printed some of the other books from that era as well in black and white, but those are two of mine that I was the happiest with. So
yeah, it looks so fantastic.
yeah, thank you. And I mean, again, I also have to take my hat off to Image Comics and Top Cow for upping the game of the comic book industry by getting the nice glossy paper. And look, don't get me wrong, I love newsprint, right? That's what I was raised on, was newsprint comics. The smell of the newsprint, there's nothing quite like it. But as an artist, seeing the translation of the 11 by 17 originals to an 8 by 10 comic book, seeing that the line work and the quality is able to be maintained in reduction the way it did because of the better glossy paper was absolutely huge. So yeah, I mean, you can thank Image Comics for that, man.
Yeah, they really upped the game and just made it just so much more cleaner and prettier and clearer. They wanted to. I've heard some artists talk about being frustrated with seeing their work printed with the quality of a bad fax, and I'm like,
Ooh.
oh, that's rough. And I kind of go back and I look at, like, Jim Lee's Uncanny X-Men run, and I'm looking at that art in the printed book, and I've got his artist edition that they made, and there's some of those black and white pages, and it's amazing the amount of detail that's lost. You know,
Yeah, it happens.
it all that effort put into the penciling and inking, and then when it's printed on that newsprint, I'm like, oh God, they lost so much of it. I'd be so frustrated. So yeah, to your point that they made it so all this amazing detail is captured. So great.
Yep. Yeah. No, and look, man, I love Image. Straight up, the happiest I've ever been, as a professional comic book artist, was my time at Top Cow, just straight up. And again, I mean, I'm very, very lucky. You'd mentioned earlier, right place, right time, when I was talking about breaking in. I mean, that never really stopped for me because I was in Southern California when Image happened. Rob Liefeld's Extreme Studios was in Anaheim. Jim Lee's Wildstorm Studios is down in San Diego. Mark Silvestri's Top Cow is up in Santa Monica, and I just lived in that sweet spot, right in the middle of all of that. So, I could get to Extreme in 15 minutes. Wildstorm was a bit longer. That's like an hour and a half, 2 hour drive, depending on traffic. At the time, I can't imagine what it's like nowadays, but back in the 90s, roughly, a little under 2 hours. And then Top Cow, 45 minutes north on the 405 for me. So I was able to get freelance gigs pretty easily, for each of these Image founders, and get to the studios, pick up pages, turn them around, and whether I drove them back or overnighted them, it definitely kept me on their radar. So that was a huge, very, very, very beneficial, very fortunate, and lucky to be in the right place and at the right time. So.
Well, speaking of art, you had some original pages you still had on hand, right? And I think, we should take opportunity to look at those and
I do. Yeah, I for the most part, I have not curated a lot of my original artwork over the years. As I mentioned earlier, the secondhand market of selling, original art is, a huge supplement for us freelancers. So most of my originals I've sold over the years. Like when I was younger, I was much more possessive of my art, and I didn't want to sell it. I wanted to hoard it and keep it, and have it. But then, as time went by and as I got older, I understood that, well, this is a huge factor in, paying my rent and putting food on the plate. So I needed to just get comfortable with, selling them. And, but to this day, I still have, a handful of pages from back in the day that I did keep my hands on. So I've picked out a few of those representing each of one of the classic artists from the 90s era and early aughts that I worked with. So that being said, we'll go ahead and turn this around, and we'll start with, and I'll do my best to give an idea of the full page. So this is a Brandon Peterson page from Arcanum. I think this is this is issue 1. It is issue 1, page 3. And when you ink someone like Brandon, it's very interesting because I talked earlier about how loose Joe Benitez was and how much interpretation goes into approaching his line work. Well, with Brandon, it is the exact opposite. It is the polar opposite. The challenge in inking a Brando piece is inking it as tight as he's penciled it. The man was so anal with every single render line. He would literally, sculpt in the pencil bleeds on every single bit of rendering, and it's like, well, that's what he wants, So I remember when I did this issue, I don't think he was very thrilled with my approach, because even though I'm respecting the pencil lines and trying to put the same ink down that he's penciled, I also do want to bring a little flavor to it, a little bit of something different. So for me, it was approaching the textures. So we can get kind of close here. So you see this guy's got this leather coat. He's like a hunter, if I remember correctly. So he's got like this monkey, this skinned monkey on his shoulder. And so it was really trying to get into the fur, give it that greasy, matted fur feel. So it's not the same as the kind of shiny leather coat that he's got. And that's not the same as his greasy hair. It's not the same greasy as the monkey, right? It's just a little bit different approach to the lines to help separate them. And it's not the same as, his weathered safari hat. Now that's like a canvas, which is different than the shiny leather, right? So these were little subtleties that I was trying to bring, because when I talk about the bleed line, I'm talking about stuff like down here where it's a thin into thick on the black shape, okay? And like I said, you better believe every single one of those lines was exactly intricately penciled in that way. And so I'm trying my damnedest to just trying to nail the strokes the same way. And I don't necessarily feel I succeeded at the time. When I wound up inking him years later on a couple issues of Mystic, it was much easier for me to nail that rendering, those lines, that sort of line work. But anyways, he did some great stuff. I mean, you look at all those folds, the drapery and folds, and the pants. Just great stuff. Really, I really had a blast inking this. I'd done a couple fill-in pages on Medieval Swan Witchblade, and that led me to getting the Arcanum gig. So did a handful of issues of that. Was a lot of fun. And yeah, like you can really see in this era of Brandon the Michael Golden influence. You look at that face specifically, right? Like that's really got a Michael Golden vibe going on. So that was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed working with him on this particular project. And this was one of those pages where I feel like it just showcased what I could do with someone like Brandon, the little things that I could bring to the plate to make it stand out, or make it a little different than how he would approach it himself or someone else. All right, I'm gonna have to turn this sideways, so hopefully it shows up fine. So this is an 11 by 17 page from the Magdalena. So Joe Benitez pencils. And this was printed at actual size as a DTS. Okay, so that is a lot of little panels, and I'm not shooting for reduction here. So I have to ink it tighter than I would on a normal page, because I know that's exactly like what's going to print. So a little bit of format paper there. I think that might be the only time I ever used format paper at Top Cow on that panel. And I had talked earlier, I was showing you the toothbrushes for effect. So this is an example here, specifically. We'll look at this stuff in the top here. It's like within the border bleed. So, I would mask off the page. You could buy, back in the day, I'm sure it's still around, but you would use frisket paper, just a clear plastic sticking on one side. You just peel off the sheet. And you slap it down, and you just use the X-Acto blade to cut out the areas that you are going to, go in there with an airbrush, or in this case, a toothbrush. And go ahead and do the work, let it dry, and then you can peel off the plastic afterwards, and then you're just left with the stenciled area that you created is where the effect went down. So this is up here is just a very simple, black splatter, and maybe if I go sideways, get in there, see a little bit better there. Just because you just take time. It doesn't take too long. You just have to be patient and careful with it, just to create a nice grad. And then right here, it's the same effect, where it's just black ink. And this is that softer the one I literally showed you in the video is the one I used for this page. And even down here, and this was fun because so what I did here was, from this side, the black, I did, toothbrush effect with black ink, and then after it dried, went back in the opposite direction with some white ink, just to help differentiate this panel from what's happening with the borders up here. So that's some fun effects that you can get with and textures to help out. And yeah, he really just, man, Joe just put the work in on this project, on Magdalena. Like, just fantastic, a lot of fun. So
look amazing.
Well, thank you, and yeah, and like I said, I had learned to love working with him on Darkness. So the Magdalena, this became one of my proudest projects out of my original Top Cow run. So love the El Joe Benitez. So I keep that page specifically because of all that. So now talking about the Top Cow, well, we got the master. I got an ink mark for 8 years. I came on the project New X-Men after Bat had left after a few pages, and that just turned into 8 years of inking Mark. And this is from the Project Hunter Killer, which was the follow-up to the New X-Men run. Mark Waid of Kingdom Come fame. Mark Silvestri pencils, my inks, Steve Furco colors. Just a tremendous project. I had a blast. It was really fun. I don't think it necessarily got the attention that it deserved at the time, quite frankly. But man, Mark, just so good. Just look at those gestures, those little silhouetted gestures. The guy lying on his back, the smoke rising. I mean, the figures. You can see so clearly that that this guy is carrying this fool, right? This fool's got his arm around his shoulder, and he's just walking him through this mess, and it's just a silhouette. It's just so simple and so elegant. It's cartooning at its finest, right? And there's the example of them walking over. And just fun stuff like that, like this guy, just strangling himself with his, seatbelt. I love it. And this panel, this is the panel where it's like these guys are blowing off their own faces. And I think when I was talking to you earlier and showing you this, I'd mentioned, to me it just felt like they're made of clay. The way that Mark drew that effect. So I had just so much fun with it. This guy, braining himself with a brick. This other guy back here throwing himself. It's in mid-flight, like he's gonna impale himself on, that wood fence. And then these guys in the top corner, getting ready to brain themselves. So, very, very fun stuff. Really cool. And then, this is that lighting I'm talking about, where Mark is such a master of light and shadow that it was just an absolute joy to anytime I got the opportunity to work with him, was just fantastic. There's nothing that compares. So true blast. I wish I still had one of the New X-Men pages, because just the sheer amount of time that all of us put into that project, I wish I'd kept one. But, again, the bills ain't going to pay themselves. So, so here we've got Will Spertaccio. So, Image co-founder. We went from one Image co-founder to another. And this was a project called Artifacts, also for Top Cow. This would have been during my second tenure with the company. So after I came back, worked with Mark, this book is what followed up my run with Mark. And it was like, well, you can't complain about that. So, check that one off of the old co-founder list. And Will's he's just so good. He has such a great design sense for laying out, like his panel layout. It's so unique, these angles that he's using for the panels, and just a little bit of negative space down here. It keeps your eye moving exactly where he wants your eye to move, and then also coupled with this this unique tech work that he does. You know, it just looks cool. It doesn't look rushed. It doesn't look cheap. It's just perfect. It's so, and it's almost, and some of the stuff in this background, it's almost simple, but it's like perfection in its elegance. It doesn't muddy the eye. It frames the figure, and it's really interesting to look at. You look, and you can get into this stuff back here, and you can see all these cool little, pipes and nifty little panels and beams and stairs. It's just great. So, and I obviously was a big fan of his work on Punisher, and later the X-Men with Scott inking him, and then the wet work stuff. Man, like the amount of detail and time that was put into those pages, just fantastic. Yeah. So this was a true joy. Okay, so just wrapping up the Wills page here. Super blast to work with him. Just fantastic. Got some nice texture work in here, some brush work in the water, some nice scuffs on the pipes, etc. Cool stuff. Like I said, real honor to work with Wills. So this is the only non-comic book page that I busted out, but I grabbed it because it's David Finch. So this was a CD cover that I got him to draw for a friend of mine. And he used an old black and white photograph as reference. And then I went ahead and went in and drew in the logo and inked the piece up. So I don't know if it ever actually got printed or not. But it was the only Finch piece I had, so I busted that out. And you can kind of see when back in the day when I was working with him, I was getting kind of chunky. I was definitely handling his line work in a very different way than I think most people have grown accustomed to seeing him inked. And honestly, it may have, led to a problem between him and I with our work. I mean, it's probably what led to me not working on Ascension, quite frankly. I don't think he was super thrilled with how experimental I was getting with the rendering. But I was having a blast. It was just such energetic work, and I kind of wanted to bring a bit of a Bill Stankovich vibe to the approach. And, I thought it was cool, but, maybe not to everyone else. So, but fun stuff.
No, it looks pretty amazing, but yeah, it looks good to me.
And then finally, so this is going to take a second, the coup de grace. And this is, I'm going to try to line it up to the best of my ability here. I'm going to have to pull back quite a bit for this one. So here we go. So this is a DPS from Fathom. So Michael Turner, Marco Galli, and I on inks. And boy, just a lot of work. And so we've got some really nice examples, and I was showing you this earlier, of just some really bold brush work in working off of the shapes that Mike gave me to create negative spacing between all the different rock formations. And that's just all brush. That's just 100% brush. All of this rock work in the foreground, just quick, bold brush strokes. I mean, at that point, probably it was definitely Winsor Newton Series 7, as I mentioned before, size 2, and just, really getting in there. And then as we get more towards the mid-ground of the piece, the negative lines are getting thinner and thinner. So we're still seeing brushwork there, but it's starting to couple up with quill work. And then as we start getting to the stuff that's the furthest out into the background, now what I'm doing is I'm using a quill to outline the negative shapes and then going in and spotting it after the fact. So none of that is white out. That's not quill white out on top of black. That's all very carefully mapped out negative spacing, and then spotted, ink spotting after the fact to create that effect. And the challenge is to make the negative lines look like they were done with whiteout and a quill or a brush, getting the thick to thins, breaking the lines to create, spacing between tapering rock formations and stuff. So a lot of patience and a lot of work. And then, we'll get into that design sense that I was talking about, where, Mike was just firing on all cylinders, creating these cool underwater ships and these cool underwater structures. That's not reference, right? That's just out of his old brain pan. And man, you can see little bits of maybe a Giger influence, but it's also kind of got like a coral vibe going on, so a little bit more organic.
Yeah.
And again, it's just all just done by him. It's not like he took a photo of a skyscraper and then reproduced it. No, that's just, I want to draw a really cool looking underwater structure. So there you go. This one actually isn't part of my class. All the pieces I just showed you are out of my personal portfolios. I still take with me whenever I do a convention. But this piece actually belongs to my girlfriend, Tatiana Dykes. Shout out, TV Art. This is one from her personal collection. And it's the only piece of Mike's that she has that I inked. She's got some beefy Mike Turner pages, from which she's got that double page spread of Ian Nottingham standing with the waterfall behind. It's one of those spreads you have to turn sideways in the comic.
Yep.
And I think he's maybe thigh deep in water. There's a waterfall behind him. He's kind of framed with the silhouettes of jungle foliage and whatnot, and his shirt's all kind of ripped up, and he's got his samurai sword, and he just looks like super badass. That is a beefy double page spread. She's got some other really nice primo pieces of Mike. So, but for the extent of this video, I wanted to be able to at least show a Turner piece as well. So there we go. That's all of the super fun stuff that I've got my hands on still to this day. A number of those just absolutely fantastic artists that I've had the opportunity to work with over the course of my career. I've said it before, I will say it again, I am just truly blessed with, the opportunities I've been given, and I've tried my best over the last 30 years just to make the absolute best of it, So, boy, Top Cow in the 90s and the early aughts was just such an amazing studio experience to be a part of, seeing, the rise of Image Comics and then being able to contribute to that. Maybe at some date we can do another one of these and I can talk more about, working with the other founders, my time freelancing at Extreme, picking
That'd
up.
be fantastic. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But to get odd jobs with Wildstorm, etc., those were, and then kind of expanding from there. Also, doing freelance work with Marvel and DC and CrossGen and other companies. But I wanted definitely to highlight, because I know you're a big fan of this era of comics specifically. So I figured it would
Definitely.
be a great introduction to kind of just taking you on a little tour of the wonderful projects that I got to work on and the amazing artists I've had the opportunity to collaborate with.
Yeah, it's amazing, man. Like I said earlier, I can't thank you enough for the opportunity to talk to you and talk tools and technique and shop and get to look at some original artwork. And it's been a big highlight of this channel that I've been doing. Get the chance to talk to you. So, like I said, I can't thank you enough.
Oh, hey, my pleasure. I thank you again for having me on, Robert. I've been loving the videos. They're just there's a nostalgic feeling I get whenever I see, like whenever YouTube recommends one of your videos, and it's like, oh, he's reviewing Cybrid. Well, hot damn, I remember that book. Um, Sam Liu, what an amazing talent! And I
Right.
remember seeing
Yeah.
those pages that when I would go, visit Extreme and pick up some work, and there's some Sam Liu pages on that for this new book he's coming out. And so it was such a fun trip down memory lane for me, both as a young professional, but also a fan, and knowing these people and being so proud of them when their books were coming out. And like we were doing the Devil's Reign stuff recently. I was like, oh yeah, what a fun project that was, and yeah, anytime I see one of your videos gets posted, and it's especially from that era, I love to jump on board, check it out, and see what you have to say about it, and then you know, I also watch some of the videos that you're doing of newer books, because since I haven't really been down to the comic shop in a hot second, it's nice to see what else is coming out there. So, for
Yeah.
example, you've been reviewing Skin Breakers, and it's like I haven't picked up any of those, but I just watch your video, and then I can check out all that beautiful artwork. So, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. It's kind of shocking to me to know that anybody who's actually worked in the industry is actually listening to me, and it kind of makes me feel a little bit nervous. And I'm like, kind of like, am I being stupid? Am I being? Because I'm like, I just started this because no one's going to listen to me. Who cares what I have to think? But suddenly, I'm like, there are some people listening. I've been contacted by a few professionals who kind of told me stuff in private and mentioned a few things, and I'm like, oh, how did I reach a point when anyone's listening to me? I'm just some loudmouth on the internet just talking for fun, but it's led me to be able to sit here and chat up you, for example, and several other guys. So it's a
Well,
big honor to me.
you got to appreciate the algorithm, right? YouTube sees that, hey, Joe, you watched, a comic book review or the comic podcast, whether it was the Kayfabe guys, years ago, or maybe a Rob Liefeld podcast. Like maybe you might like this, and it's like, oh, look, this guy's reviewing one of my books. I'll check it out, and then it just snowballed from there. So,
Yeah.
it's been a lot of fun. So I appreciate you very much for always being so complimentary of my work and your appreciation for inking and the black and white original artwork. I mean, obviously, and I told you this earlier when we chatted, or the other day when we chatted, that I think that was one of the things that resonated with me. Was obviously you have the eye of an artist, because when you're looking at these books, you're looking at the artwork. You're talking about the artwork. You're talking about the techniques. You're talking about the approach. You're talking about what the penciler was thinking when he, laid out this page, or when he, drew this background, or you're talking about like the textures that you're seeing in the inks, or the line work, and that's a certain appreciation that the, average YouTube comic fan reviewer is not necessarily going to be as succinct about, or really catch on. So I think that's one of the things that sets you apart, at least with me, that I noticed, and has made it more interesting when I'm watching your videos. So
Yeah, and I
keep up
appreciate
the
it. Like I
great
said,
work.
I do draw my own stuff. I do make my own art, and so I have some understanding of it. By no means do I think I'm like, oh, I have the understanding of a working professional. Not at all, but I do think about it and apply it and try to do my own stuff. And so I've hoped that kind of helps give my opinions on some stuff, some kind of unique kind of approach to it, kind of like you were saying. So it feels validating to hear it from someone at your caliber. So again, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much, Robert.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it, and I'll chat you up again, and we should do this again. If there's more to, I could talk to you forever. We've been going about 2 hours, so if you ever want to do this again, I'd be happy to. So
I'm amazed my Bluetooth has lasted this long. So we're lucky.
yeah, I hear you. All right, man. I'll let
Awesome,
you
man.
go, and I'll catch you
Sounds
next time, man.
sounds good. You have a great night. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.